really cool. They put out this first video we're gonna watch today, where they look at the 10 earliest images of Jesus that have been discovered so far. We're gonna take a look at them. We're gonna see what they look like. I want to hear from you. Which one do you think, if any, might be the closest to what you imagine Jesus to look like? And then we're going to talk about the Shroud of Turin and a shocking claim that just hit the internet yesterday. At least it's the first time I've heard about it, from this particular scientist that worked on the Shroud. We're going to take a look at him. So let's just jump in and see what we can discover. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Are you ready? Here we go.
Over the last 2,000 years, Jesus has been depicted in many different ways. But as I'm sure you know, nowadays he's usually depicted as a gentle-looking European with long hair and a beard. Like in this famous 1940 painting of Jesus by Warner Salmon. Of course, Jesus wasn't European though. He was from the Middle East. So in recent years, there have been attempts by several different artists to show what Jesus really looked like, such as this anthropological reconstruction.
Okay, so I don't know if you've seen this anthropological reconstruction of Jesus. Looks like an ape, in my opinion, or like some evolutionary crafting or molding of Jesus. Not sure if they tried to make him look like a caveman on purpose or what, but interested to know your thoughts about all of these. They're sort of interesting. This image over here on the left side of the screen, the stereotypical white Jesus. In the title of this video, I asked, is Jesus white? Would love to know your thoughts. In my opinion, no. He's a Jewish man, Palestinian Jewish man, so he's probably going to look a little bit closer to the individual on the right in terms of skin color. So it's baffling to me that we have made Jesus look like a European white man in so many films and so many pictures, and things of that nature. It's historically far off, but it's just interesting how it's lingered throughout the lanes of history, even up to Chosen. Now, I thought the cast of Chosen was pretty good, but one thing that goes beyond the color of skin for me is that you remember Jesus was in his early 30s when he died, especially when he began ministry, public ministry, that is. And if you notice Jonathan Rumi in the Chosen series, he's in his mid to late 40s. So most of the depictions of Jesus that we get today are this stoic, mature, manly man, which I love, and it definitely plays into some psychology that we have of Jesus as comforter and mature and stoic and all of those things. But Jesus was my age. So I'll be 30 later this year. I'm a young gun. And I'm just thinking, I don't some of the things that Jesus did and walked in, as a 30-year-old, I don't feel that mature or that stoic that we tend to portray Jesus. And so it's interesting, to me, that thought process that Jesus was a young guy, really young. He probably didn't look like Jonathan Rumi in the sense of Jonathan Rumi's 45, 48 years old. So these are just some interesting things to think about. They, for your own spiritual edification, I don't know how much they matter, but anyway.
Richard Neve. Or there's a photorealistic image by Bas Uderwijk. Well, another way to figure out what Jesus might have looked like would be to go back as far as we can to see how he was depicted in art in the first few centuries following his death. So that's what we're going to do in this video. I'm going to be showing you 10 of the earliest images we have of Jesus, and I'll be doing it in the form of a countdown.
So, by the way, while we got the intro going on, go look at useful charts. I've put the link to this video down
look at some
in
of
the
earliest
description, but go check out their website. They have some really cool charts that they've made. on there that you might find useful even for your own Bible studies. I know I have some that when I teach the Genesis class, which by the way, I'm hoping to bring that to YouTube Live here real soon. It's a really deep Genesis class. It's over 12 hours long of in-depth Genesis study. I actually use a couple of the charts just to help because there's a lot of imagery I pull into that Genesis class, and so they are a very useful company. Go check them out.
Depictions of Jesus in art. I'm going to start with an image that can be found here. This is the St. Catherine's Monastery, located in Egypt near the mountain that is traditionally considered to be Mount Sinai. This is also the monastery where the Codex Sinaiticus was found, which I discussed in my video about the oldest Bible manuscripts. However, I mention it now because it also houses this image, considered to be one of the oldest Byzantine icons still in existence, dating to around 550 CE. Now, if you know anything about the history of the Byzantine Empire, aka the Eastern Roman Empire, you'll know that icons were a source of great controversy. Basically, an icon is a religious image used for worship. In the early medieval period, there were some Byzantine Christians who felt that icons should be used, and others who felt that they should not be used. Well, during most of the 700s into the early 800s, those who felt that they should not be used held sway. And therefore, during those years, many of the oldest images of Jesus were destroyed. However, this particular one survived because it was located in Egypt, which by that time was controlled by Muslims. Now, let me point out two things about this.
So before he points this out, I want to point out a couple things. First, let me know what you think about this first image. It's kind of freaky, and he's going to explain why it looks really weird. Just a minute. There's a reason, but it is freaky. But Sinai, interesting note. I don't hold the belief that Sinai is right here depicted in this image. Like he said, I actually believe it's Jabal al-Lawz, or that's what's the modern day name for it in Saudi Arabia, which is just pretty interesting. You can go look that up on your own time. But yeah, this is the first interesting photo. What are your thoughts on this? There's several of you in the chat already. Jesus is Jewish and should look like a Jew from Lordist. Yeah, absolutely. John 3:16, he would be looking like someone who's out in the elements because he was, yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of that. It's just interesting to see these old images and what they imagined he'd look like. So let's see a couple interesting features that the author of this video notes.
Particular depiction of Jesus. First, it is in a style known as the Christ Pantocrator, which to this day is quite frequently used in Eastern Orthodox churches. Some of its main features include a halo with a cross in it, a New Testament in Jesus' left hand, and his right hand making a very specific gesture that represents the letters ICXC, which stands for Jesus Christ. Secondly, this particular Christ Pantocrator is unique in that there's something special going on with Jesus' face. At first glance, the eyes look a bit weird, and you might have assumed that the artist was simply not that good. But the reason why the face looks a bit strange is that the artist actually painted two different faces. This becomes clear if you mirror each side.
Okay, look at this. What is happening? Okay, so what is happening down here? Like, I don't know. Can you guys see? You can't see my mouse on the screen, unfortunately. On the picture to the right where he's holding the New Testament, like, do you guys see like a lion in his throat right there? How weird is that? And then the throat of the other one, it looks like there's two eyes and a beak or something. It looks like there's animal depictions in the throat. But which one? The one on the left is like as white as they come. I mean, he's about as white as I am. And then the dude on the right, I'm not even sure what to think about the dude on the right. This is nuts. But hey, I will say, whoever painted this, the artist, that the idea of being able to take two different images, and I mean, from an art perspective, it seems kind kind of neat. I can barely draw a stick figure, so
For this probably
I don't
has
know.
to do with the artist's attempt to symbolize Jesus' supposed dual nature. Okay, the next image we're going to look at is located in the Israeli town of Shivta, which is actually not too far from the St. Catherine's Monastery. It too comes from a Byzantine site and dates to around 550. But as we're about to see, it is quite a bit different. For one thing, the image is no longer in very good shape. The church it is located in now lies in ruins, and although the site was investigated in the 1930s, it was only in 2018 that this image was noticed.
Hmm.
Here's what it looks like. If you can't see much, I don't blame you. Let me zoom out a bit and add some lines. So, two things stand out right away. One is that this Jesus does not have a beard, and two, he appears to have short, curly hair instead of long, straight hair. So, although this image was created around the same time as the previous one, it represents a very different way of depicting Jesus.
What do you think Jesus looked like in regards to beard and hair? Do you think he had a beard? Do you think he had long hair or short hair? I'm curious as to what you think. According to how Jews would have conducted their hairstyles back in the day, I'm thinking he had a beard. There's a lot in the Torah that would insinuate it was very important to have a beard. And then there is argument because of some scripture on whether or not he would have long hair or short hair. But I have my thoughts, but I want to hear what your thoughts are on that.
One that we will see more of the further back in time we go. A good example is the next image I want to show you, which is over 100 years older and comes from the mausoleum of Galla Placidia in Ravenna, Italy. Galla Placidia was the daughter of Emperor Theodosius I, who was the emperor that made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. This isn't actually her mausoleum or burial place, though. Rather, it is a chapel that she had built during her lifetime. Luckily, it is very well preserved. Over the north entrance is this colorful mosaic of Jesus as the Good Shepherd, a theme that comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 10. Once again, note the curly hair and lack of a beard. Next,
I will say, beautiful piece of art. Like, if you're just talking imagery, I think it's a beautiful. But like, what are they doing with Jesus in this? I don't know.
to show you another image from the same time period, roughly 425 CE. This is a carving from the doors of Santa Sabina Basilica in Rome, which is the headquarters of the Dominican Order of Catholic
It looks like he has
friars.
a beard and some
What
long
makes this
hair
image
here.
particularly important is that it is the oldest known image of Jesus on the cross, the other two individuals being the two thieves that Jesus was traditionally said to be crucified alongside. Here, Jesus once again has a beard, which goes to show that during the 5th and 6th centuries, there was still some variation when it came to how Jesus was depicted. Let's now move from the 5th century to the 4th century, i.e., the 300s CE. Most of the images from this century, as well as any that are even older, are located in catacombs. Catacombs are underground burial places, and in ancient Rome, there were many of these. It is often said that early Christians used these catacombs to worship in secret for fear of being persecuted. However, generally speaking, this is not actually true. Most of the catacombs were used by early Christians as, well, catacombs, a place to bury the dead. But what's useful for our purposes is that catacombs were often decorated, and because they were located underground and eventually forgotten, many of the decorations survived longer than those that were located above ground. Take, for example, this next image from the catacombs of Comodilla. Here we have what's likely the oldest surviving image of a bearded Jesus.
Now, on this one, I don't know. I'm interested to know your thoughts. I'm not taking too seriously the pigmentation of the of Christ here because I feel like a lot of that's influenced by the paper that's being used. So we're taking into account just the features of the hair primarily, which his beard tends to be a little bit more pointed, and that's not, from my understanding, that's not a Jewish thing. That definitely comes later on in time in Latin Rome. Not maybe not Rome. Rome, it was pretty shaved. It was just much further down the lanes of history, like cardinals, and so I'm thinking like what's the movie? The Three Musketeers era, whatever era that is. I'm thinking the pointy beard is more in that era. But anyway,
dating to around 375 CE. What's interesting about this 1,650-year-old image is that it's not too far off from the average image of Jesus we see today. The two symbols on each side of his halo are an alpha and an omega, the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet, often used by early Christians to represent the belief that Jesus has existed for all eternity. But take away that halo and the two letters, and we're still left with an image that most people today would easily identify as being Jesus.
that's fair.
However, this is not going to be the case for the images that are even older than this one. This is because originally Jesus was always depicted without a beard. And as we're about to see, he usually just looks like a typical Roman from the time of the Roman Empire. Take, for example, this image from the catacombs of Marcellinus and Peter. Here we see a woman depicted as touching the edge of Jesus' garment, a story that comes from Mark chapter 5. According to the story, the woman was healed automatically as soon as she touched Jesus' clothes. But what's important to notice is that he is depicted as looking very Roman. Short haircut, no beard. And look what he's wearing, a tunic with stripes over the shoulders, something that in Roman society was very common and indicated a person of authority.
So you gotta imagine here, like, what makes some of this so asinine is like, we're talking about Jesus, and we're talking about a narrative, right, where the woman with the issue of blood comes and grabs his seats. You're thinking, is Jesus gonna walk around basically looking like the oppressors of Jerusalem, the oppressors of Israel? Is he going to adopt and conform to their culture and to their way of living? And that's what makes these pictures so unrealistic. Of course, whoever's doing this is probably just depicting Jesus in their own image, and maybe they're not thinking twice about it, but it's certainly humorous from this end.
He's also wearing a mantle on top of his tunic, which, take note, is different from a toga. The mantle was actually the more common garment at the time. It was basically just a sheet that wrapped around a person and served as a simple coat. What's notable about Jesus' mantle, though, is that it has
Now,
a
mantles
visible
in and
tassel,
of themselves
which is
are
what the woman is touching. This is likely a depiction of a tzitzit, a ritual fringe that Jews wear to this very day.
Yes. Okay. So mantles and tzitzits are very much, Jewish. Mantles in and of themselves are not Jewish. So I don't know if they would have gone by that term, but I mean, they would have worn something similar to a mantle. Even Elijah, Elisha, we have that kind of language that we see in the Old Testament. And so they probably wore something similar. So we're really dealing with like the haircut and the shaved face and all that. And yeah, definitely made into the image and ethnicity of the artists, no doubt.
That Jesus' Jewishness is indicated not by the color of his skin or by his facial features, but by something that he is wearing. The rest of the images we're going to look at all come from the 3rd century, i.e. the 200s CE. This one shows Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. Again, we get the short haircut with no beard, combined with a simple tunic
Is that an
and
earring?
mantle. But this time, he's got a wand. Yep, that's right. A wand, just like Harry Potter.
Oh,
In the
man.
Roman Empire during the 3rd century, wands were a symbol of magic, just like they are today. And to Romans back then, the stories of Jesus healing people and raising people from the dead were understandably seen as being stories about magic.
I mean, this image, I mean, that looks like Voldemort or Voldemort or however you pronounce the guy's name. This one's brutal. And it looks like Lazarus. I mean, I know he's supposed to be wrapped in like toilet paper or whatever they had, but it looks like he's a prisoner in a jail cell, which is kind of humorous. And what's on the edge of the wand? I don't know. It's interesting.
We've now come to our final 3 images. The 3rd oldest image we have of Jesus is from this sarcophagus lid, which is inscribed with the words Severa in Deo Vivas. But note that the person shown to the left of the words is not Jesus. That's likely an image of Severa, the woman who was buried in this particular sarcophagus. In Deo Vivas means, may you live with God. Jesus is over here. He's, of course, the baby being held by his mother, Mary. Standing behind them is presumably Joseph. And in front of them are the 3 wise men and the Star of Bethlehem. So, yeah, image number 3 is basically a Christmas image.
So, this might just be the most accurate picture of Jesus that we have out of all 10 of these, just because how do you mess up a baby? I don't know.
Moving on to number 2, which is this image that comes from the catacomb of Calixtus and dates to around
So you got a
250
kilt
CE.
on?
Here, Jesus is once again
Stockings?
depicted as being the Good Shepherd. And this time he's wearing a short tunic, the kind a shepherd at that time would have worn. Note that he also looks quite young, as he most likely would have been, considering that he died in his early 30s. You should also note that
I can respect that.
a religious
I can
figure
respect
with
that.
a
You remember what I
lamb
mentioned at the beginning, talking about Jonathan Rumi being in his late 40s and Jesus being closer to my age. So I could respect that.
or goat around his neck was not something that ancient Greeks and Romans would have found all that strange. In fact, they were quite used to that imagery, as it was commonly used in depictions of the god Hermes, or Mercury. Okay, we've now come to what is very likely the earliest known depiction we have of Jesus. Unlike the last several we looked at, which were all found in Rome, this one was found in Syria, in the ruins of an ancient city called Dura Europos. The Dura Europos site is located on the Euphrates River, near what is today the border between Syria and Iraq. But during the early 3rd century, it was a thriving city and Rome's easternmost stronghold. Luckily for archaeologists, it was abandoned soon thereafter and never rebuilt, and therefore it is a bit of a time capsule. Located at Dura Europos is the oldest church ever found, as well as one of the oldest synagogues. Both contain artwork. So not only does Dura Europos give us the earliest known depiction of Jesus, it also gives us the earliest known depictions of many other Bible characters too, such as Abraham, Moses, and David.
Well, that's really interesting. Abraham. See, that's what I picture Abraham, kind of looking like, being from the area he was from. Moses, a little bit more olive-skinned, which I think is very fair. But David, I'm not sure what happened with David. That poor guy.
This video we are focusing on Jesus. So without further ado, let me reveal to you the oldest known image we have of Jesus. This image is based on a story that is told in all 3 of the synoptic gospels, in which a paralyzed man is lowered down through a roof so that Jesus can heal him, which he does. So on the left, you can see the now healed man carrying his bed. And
Looks
on
like
the
a
right,
table.
you can see Jesus in his typical Roman form. Short hair.
You know, the first time I saw this, I thought this was a depiction of Jesus flipping tables in the temple, and he had just flipped a table onto a guy. I don't know if that's a cruel joke, but that's what I thought this was. But I guess the guy's carrying a mat with legs.
No beard, simple tunic, and mantle. Our best guess is that this image dates to around 235 CE. So basically, we have nothing from the first 200 years after Jesus' death. Well, not quite. There's actually one more bonus image that I want to show you. I didn't include it on the main list because it doesn't actually show Jesus' face. This is actually a piece of graffiti made by a non-Christian in order to poke fun at someone named Alexamenos, who was a Christian. The words, written in Greek and scratched below the image, read, Alexamenos worships his god. Depicted on the left is presumably Alexamenos, and on the right is Jesus hanging on the cross, but with the head of a donkey, which was obviously meant as an insult. To non-Christians at the time, it seemed absurd for anyone to worship someone that had been crucified, and this graffiti expresses that sentiment. Okay, so that was a look at some of the earliest.
Wow. So that's pretty cool. Those were some of the earliest pictures we have of Jesus throughout the lanes of history. Let me know which one you thought, if any, were the most accurate, either in the chat or the comments after this video is posted. But I think it's pretty interesting to see the imagination of individuals throughout the lanes of history, because we have plenty of depictions of Jesus, you know, from the last couple hundred years. And I think a lot of us would agree just how wildly off that they are. But what's interesting to me is it seems like they've been just about that off since 200 CE, which is when the earliest ones came out. So the one where Jesus was healing the man on the mat, you know, I thought that was fair considering the timetable there. But let me know what you thought about those. Okay, let's go over now to something really exciting. Glenn Beck, a day or two ago, released a video that is his short phone call with a gentleman who worked on the Shroud of Turin. And I'm sure you've seen some videos as of late of the Shroud of Turin and the scientific evidence from all of the testing they've been doing here in the recent past. And it's mind-boggling. This video is not going to go into the depths of all of the mind-boggling discoveries that they've made. Perhaps I will another time. If you're interested in that, let me know. Or I can just put the link to a video I think is pretty helpful in the description. Today, I just want to focus on a claim that his friend, the Jewish, I believe he's a Jewish scientist who predominantly focused on taking photographs during the time of testing. He analyzed the evidence. He's not a Christian, but he makes a really shocking claim that I think we should all give some consideration to. So let's dive into this Glenn Beck interview and see what comes of this.
When they did the last test on the Shroud of Turin. If you don't know what the Shroud of Turin is, it is said to be the burial cloth of Christ. And there's a lot of controversy about it because the carbon dating shows that it's not from the time of Christ. It's like 800 or 1,000 years later. And they can tell you that it's definitely not the Shroud of Christ, but they cannot explain the image on the shroud. It is almost a photographic negative of a body that has all of the wounds that Christ would have had. They can't tell you what it is, but they can tell you what it's not. Well,
So just a little context here. In other words, the image on the shroud defies all scientific explanation in modern day technology. Like, in other words, we couldn't recreate the shroud with our fabrics and our technology and our scientific understanding today. That's how crazy this shroud is. We could literally not recreate it today. And then there's just crazy things regarding, like, for example, I'll try to explain this the best that I can. But have you ever seen one of those photos where you have, like, I don't know what you would call it, maybe where you can see multiple instances in time. Let's say we take a runner who's running and you can see the present snap, but then behind the runner, you can see like the motion of the runner and like layered images catching up to the modern day. So essentially the shroud is that very thing. And so what some suggest is like it's almost as if it was a snapshot of like Jesus being resurrected or transformed into his resurrected body, because the shroud, the image on the shroud has movements to it. Like it's almost like it took several snapshots of milliseconds. It was just, I'll try to put a link to that video below that I saw that explained, because it's just mind-boggling. The scientists can't explain the vast majority of things. The shroud is truly a phenomenon. So that's what he's getting at here.
He talks to me, and then all of a sudden, one of my producers, who was taking Torah study, hears about Barry in her Torah study, and she reaches out to Barry, and unbeknownst to me, she says, "We got to get you on the show." So on this day that I come in to tell everybody we got to book Barry, you know, down in Texas, I'm in Idaho. My producer says, "Hey, we gotta get Barry on. I think he's going to be great." And I said, "Have I already told you guys about him?" "No. Why?" "I think it's a God thing that he's on. His name is Barry Schwartz, and he is joining us now." Hello, Barry. How are you?
I'm doing great, Glenn. Thanks for having me on the program.
You bet. So, Barry, you are the official documenting photographer. So you were up close and personal with the shroud. You took all of the pictures. Were you a believer that this was the burial garb of Christ when you first started?
Absolutely not, Glenn. I was a total skeptic. I was raised in an Orthodox Jewish home. Although I'm a secular Jew and not practicing, I didn't really have any emotional attachment to the shroud. And my involvement mainly came from my background as a photographer and imaging specialist. And so I was invited onto the team to participate in the examination of the shroud. We spent 5 days and nights nonstop working around the clock back in 1978 and performed the first and only in-depth scientific study of that cloth that's ever been done in its history.
Okay, so you were one of 3 Jewish members of the Shroud team. Were there non-skeptics on the team?
I'm sure that a few of the members of the team were less skeptical than I was, let's put it that way.
Okay.
I think that most of the team members came from Los Alamos National Labs, Sandia Labs.
And I just want to say, regarding the shroud, I'll raise my hand and say I'm pretty skeptical myself. So I'll go into it skeptical.
Air Force Weapons Lab.
And I'm a believer. Like, I'm not Jewish, right? Like, I believe in Jesus. I believe he's historical. I believe all of this stuff. And I'm still skeptical of the shroud being Christ's going into it. But so, yeah, I get it.
So these were hardcore scientists, and thank God for that, because if they weren't hardcore scientists, the whole world might have blown up by now. So they were very meticulous and absolutely the most empirical scientists I've ever worked with.
That is a claim, just so you know. The most empirical scientists I've ever worked with. That's a big statement. That's a big statement.
Okay, so they did the tests and they said it's the carbon dating is wrong, and
Well,
it's not the shroud.
the carbon dating didn't happen until 10 years after we examined the shroud. Our team examined it, and our primary purpose was really to determine how that image was formed. Is it a painting? Is it a scorch? Or was it made photographically? And ultimately, the science eliminated all those possibilities. So as you said in the intro, we can tell you what it's not, but we don't know of a mechanism that can create an image on a piece of cloth with the same chemical and physical properties that we documented on the shroud.
So does it look like there's, I mean, was it something that you were like, we can't explain it, but we can see somehow or another it's man created?
Well, we don't believe it is. There's nothing been added to the surface of that cloth. And I mean, that's the first thing we looked for was any paint, pigments, binders, anything that would imply that something had been added to the cloth that would have created the image, and we found nothing. If anything, the image itself is made of yellow discolored fibers, and it's the concentration of those fibers in any given area that indicates the darkness of that area itself. So there really was nothing added there. So my initial response, even though I was totally skeptic, after about the first 15 minutes of looking at it with a 10x magnifier, I knew that there wasn't any paint on the surface of that, and ultimately our mass spectrometry and chemical analyses, X-ray analyses, all of that showed that nothing has been added, no pigments, no paints, nothing has been added to that cloth to create that image.
Okay. Nothing has been added to the cloth to create the image. So essentially, that was like the first thing one of the first things the scientists went after was just like, hey, let's just go ahead and easily prove that something artificial has been added to this thing. And then one after another, nope. Well, nothing's been added to the cloth. So this isn't even skeptical claims at this point. This is like scientists tried their best to like debunk this thing, and nope.
I have to tell you, that's not what I thought the Shroud of Turin experts said. I've always thought that the scientific experts deny that this is, from the time period, and it was definitely man-made. It's not.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
You mentioned the radiocarbon dating, which was done 10 years after our team completed our work. And for decades after that, the world said, well, the shroud must be a fake. It took 27 years in the Freedom of Information Act to get the British Museum, that was the overseer of the three labs that did the radiocarbon testing. It took 27 years for the British Museum to release the raw data, which is very unusual. Historically, a scientist, once his work is published in a journal, will release the raw data so other scientists can either repeat the experiment, which is part of the scientific method, or...
Okay, so something very sus is already going on. He's saying in 1978, they did their work and came to their conclusions. Then, 10 years later, in 1988, they did the radiocarbon testing. Well, for 10 years after that, so they basically just made claims from that. But they didn't publish any of the testing data. They didn't publish anything, which is, he's saying, is extremely unusual, because this is the way the scientific community functions. This is the way the scientific community goes further in scientific understanding, and all that is scientists will do experiments, then they'll publish findings in a journal, data in a journal, and once it's published, it's official. Other scientists will then come along and take that years down the road and expound upon it. All right, but they in 1988, if I'm hearing this correct, they did more testing. They claimed the shroud wasn't of the time period, but did not publish any data. And what he's saying is it took 27 years, and the some sort of Information Act, yada yada, for this institution to finally publish it. So that's pretty suspicious.
Or perhaps take the information and try and go further with it. So we finally got the raw data, and we can understand why they didn't want to release it. It showed that the sample site, and there was only one sample taken, which is already bad science, it showed that that sample was inhomogeneous, meaning it was a strip that was cut, and there was one date at one end and hundreds of years later at the other end of that strip. So there was nowhere on that strip that we can claim gave us the date for anywhere else on that cloth. And they never took a control sample from anywhere else. So the radiocarbon dating...
That's a big deal. All right, so essentially, if I'm not mistaken, what he's saying is they took a corner of the cloth that was sewn in sometime down the lanes of history and only did radiocarbon dating on that piece that was sewn in the future, but it did not reflect the accurate time period of the rest of the cloth. And he's saying this is the reason they didn't want to show us the data, is because they didn't do any other testing on any other part of the cloth, just the part that had fibers that were sewn in sometime other down the lanes of history.
So wait. I want to make sure I understand this. So this was like a repair made later on the cloth?
Correct.
That they took?
Yep, there's evidence in that corner where the sample was taken that there's cotton interwoven, and that goes against Jewish law. It's called mixing of the kinds, and you're not supposed to mix wool with cotton or cotton with the linen. A burial shroud of someone of high stature is supposed to be pure linen, and yet we found cotton in the corner that was ultimately radiocarbon dated, and that implied that there was a repair or reweaving done in that corner, and so they dated a repaired corner of the shroud, which could not give us an accurate date for anywhere else on that cloth.
But how do you know that there isn't cotton through the rest of the fiber if you didn't test the rest of the fiber?
Well, during our examination, 5 days and nights in 78, we carefully examined, the shroud's almost 15 feet long. So while one scientist group was working at one side of the shroud or one end of the shroud, other researchers were evaluating other parts of the cloth. And Ray Rogers, our lead chemist from Los Alamos National Lab, probably spent more time in front of that cloth than all the rest of us put together with a microscope examining fibers from every part of that cloth. Okay. And we found no cotton anywhere else in that cloth.
That's pretty amazing. Because if Jesus were going to be buried in something, this is exactly the kind of material it would have been. Fully linen. No mixed fabrics. I think it's Leviticus 19:19, which talks about not mixing like fabrics and cloths and things of that nature, which is what's being referred to here. And so, that's pretty crazy. The fact that they examined all 15 feet of this shroud and it was fully linen. There was no other cotton stitched in. That's pretty cool.
Interwoven. We were wearing white cotton gloves, and some of the white cotton from our gloves got onto the cloth, but that's modern cotton and distinguishable from ancient cotton.
So why would the British Museum do this?
Well, Glenn, it's hard for me to speak to this, but I will say this, that as soon as the results were leaked, even before their paper was published claiming the shroud was medieval, the British Museum, or rather the Oxford Laboratory, one of the three labs that examined the shroud, received £1 million from anonymous donors for debunking the shroud. And Dr. Mike...
Follow the money. Follow the money. There's been a lot of that going on. A lot of that. Hey, we'll pay you to say this on your report. We'll pay you to say this is how they died. We'll pay you to make sure we use this particular machine. We'll pay you, to, come to these conclusions when you're testing this. Interesting.
Tide of the British Museum left the British Museum and took a permanent chair at Oxford with some of that money. So I hate to say follow the money, but perhaps that had some influence.
Okay, so you were a skeptic You didn't believe in it. You're Jewish. You didn't feel emotional when you first approached the shroud, which I would think I would. Even
I will say, I went to Israel and they had the shroud on display there at the time, and I went and saw the shroud, and I had, granted, I don't really think I had a complete understanding of what I was looking at. I was skeptical. I was like, because there's a lot of things you go in Israel and it's totally like people are capitalizing on tourism, especially the Catholic Church in the Constantine era and all that. So I'm looking at the shroud and I'm thinking, I'm skeptic, but I still couldn't help but be moved to like tears. And I think at the time I chalked it off to like the fact that I did heavily consider that even if this wasn't Jesus, that this was at least a human being that was brutally beaten, tortured, and I'm seeing the wounds and stuff, and I was a skeptic, but I approached it, and you could feel the solemnness there. So that was interesting.
if it isn't real, it is so inspiring, and if somebody did it, it's a miracle they did it. We don't understand how they did it.
Right. Well, look.
But how do you feel? Go ahead.
I think we all had reverence for the subject matter. We all appreciated the fact that not only was this an object of scientific research, but it was also an object of faith for a billion or so people. So we all had great respect for it. And so although I didn't have the same emotional response that perhaps some of my Christian fellow team members might have had, we all treated it with the highest respect and regard, and acted professionally throughout.
Sure. Now, how do you feel now?
Well, it took 17 years after we finished, and I had access, of course, to all of the scientific research. And after about 17 years, all of the questions that I had that had been unanswered became answered, and I had to resign myself to the fact that the most plausible explanation for this was that this is the burial shroud of the historic Jesus of Nazareth. You know, you don't have to be a Christian to accept the historicity of Jesus and to accept that we might have an artifact of that man's life, considering the impact he's had on this planet.
Okay. Did y'all hear it? Hold on. Should we replay that? That is profound. Let's see what he says.
This is the burial shroud of the became answered, and I had to resign myself to the fact that the most plausible explanation for this was that this is the burial shroud of the historic Jesus of Nazareth.
Okay, you have a Orthodox, well, I don't know if he's practicing Orthodox. He don't believe in Jesus as the Messiah. Okay, so he has no incentive to want this to be the historic Jesus, but he does believe Jesus. Yeah, he's a historical figure. He lived. Great. So he's safe saying the only explanation I got is that this is the historical Jesus's shroud. Which my follow-up question to the man is, if this is the historical Jesus and he's connected to a shroud full of miracles, is he still just a man to you? That's the question I want to ask. Is he still just a random historical figure man to you? If you're going to say, yeah, this shroud, the very essence of its existence is a phenomenon. Not to mention all of the elements scientifically that we can't explain or prove. It's a miracle shroud. And not only that, I think it has to be Jesus Christ's. How are you going to connect Jesus Christ to a historical shroud and still just consider him a regular man that lived? You know, like you don't even have to go as far as the Trinitarians and say, oh, he's God in the flesh. Like, you just go to the fact that he was the Messiah. Like, I don't understand how you can say, after studying this scientifically, yeah, this is got to be Jesus, because it's the fact you're saying this is Jesus. It's not because you have blood DNA. It's not because you have any real scientific reason to say it's Christ's shroud, other than it's associated with so many miracles, so many phenomena. That's literally the only reason you're saying it's Christ's. So if you're associating the man Jesus Christ with miracles, then how can you just believe he's a historical figure, a historical man? I don't know. I'd love to ask him that. To me, I need to do more homework on the shroud, I guess. I'm just stumbling into it. Everything I'm hearing is pretty amazing. If it is the shroud of Christ, I think that's pretty mind-boggling. Let me see. This is impromptu. I did not really plan this, but let me see if I can't. Just because we've been talking so much of the image of Jesus today, let me see if I can't pull up a photo to conclude our time together. Of the shroud. Give it my best go here. Let's pull up a ton. All right, it's wanting to show a bunch of screens here, isn't it? Let's see. There we go. So here we have some different, I mean, this is just pretty amazing, the depictions. And then I don't know if you guys have seen the real life 3D mold of Christ that they made based on the shroud. Is pretty cool. But you can see the depictions of the face there, which I don't know. I mean, who can say if these, these 3D molds, how accurate they are to the imprints on the shroud or not? I'm not sure. But nonetheless, like, the fact that this right here is probably Jesus. I mean, it's just really interesting to me. So anyway, this has been a fun little stream. I hope it's been fun for you. Like it, share it, comment your thoughts on the first video we watched. Do you think any of them look like Jesus? What are your thoughts on what Jesus must have looked like? What are your thoughts on the shroud? I'm curious about all of this. I have no real thoughts or inputs. I'd love to hear yours, so let me know below. If you haven't already, I'd love to invite you to join our community and subscribe. We have been doing a lot of these kinds of fun live streams, but we're kicking off, moving into the fall, and my summer schedule switching into my fall schedule, and I am excited and hopeful to have a lot more biblical studies coming your way. I know a lot of you guys are excited about those things, so like, share, subscribe, turn on notifications, all that, to stay in the loop when we go live, because a lot of times my live streams are not scheduled. They're kind of just impromptu. It's kind of the way my life is working right now. So make sure you turn on those notifications. And if you're interested in Bible study, the Bible study elements, please reach out to me, comment, whatever you want to do. If there's particular topics or books of the Bible or anything like that that you want me to zero in on, themes, focus on, and I will try my best to consider that as I plan out a schedule for biblical studies. So anyway, until next time I see you guys, God bless you, and I wish you well.